My fundamental belief is that you get better through repetition. And so I love reading and learning. And so spaced repetition was my thing. I wanted to learn how to be better at all of those things. And you can read about something, but you've got to be on the field of battle to really have those lessons solidified and then to be able to take that learning to the next one.
Welcome to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm Sachin, co-founder of Scale My Clinic, here to help general practice owners build thriving, profitable and efficient clinics. Together with Todd, we bring you actionable strategies, inspiring success stories and expert insights to transform your practice. Let's dive into today's episode and take the next step to improving your practice. Welcome, and on today's podcast, we have a very, very special guest for you. He's a GP, he's a business coach, and he's my favourite business partner, Dr. Todd Cameron. So today, we thought it would be useful. We don't often talk about ourselves, and we thought it would be useful to hear our journey, in this case, Todd's journey, warts and all, his ownership journey, and maybe a little bit more about him. I'm going to get my Jerry Springer on and try and uncover and unpeel this onion and what all the layers within. Welcome, Todd. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Sachin. I'm feeling equally excited and nervous at the moment.
Don't worry, there's no special Jerry Springer-esque guests coming, so don't worry. So, Todd, Dr. Todd Cameron, thank you, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Hey, let's just take a bit of a journey in a time machine, and let's go back to your early days, and you can start wherever it's relevant for you, but I'd love to hear your background and journey into general practice ownership. Take us on a trip down memory lane.
All right, cool. So as a kid, I had asthma that was pretty serious. And so when I grew up, there wasn't a lot of effective treatment for asthma. And so what that meant was for about 18 months of age, I spent a lot of time in hospitals. And that was where my interest in medicine came from, just being exposed to it and being on the receiving end of that kind of care. And, you know, I visited my GP a lot during that time as well. My parents didn't have anything to do with healthcare. My dad was an insurance salesperson. My mum was an administrator and sort of did that through offices with my dad at schools and sort of places like that. And so there wasn't really any other influence on me for that other than the time that I spent in illness. And when I was younger and going through hospital, having asthma wasn't a lot of fun. I was sort of in hospital a fair bit. It was pretty brittle asthma. And year 12, for example, for me, I was in there for about a quarter of the year. And so I was pretty self-reliant. I would just do my study in there. And I did meet a lot of kids that had cystic fibrosis. So one of the things that it taught me was no matter how bad I thought I was, the odds were that I was getting out of there alive. And in that era, you know, those kids really had a tough time. They were, if they got past 21, they were doing really well. And so, you know, being in there a bit, I got to know a few of these kids. And so it was a really good reminder that there's usually somebody that's substantially worse off. So it was my kind of introduction to medicine. My dad being in insurance, he wasn't much of a reader, but he did get a lot of books because he was in clubs like things called the $1 Million Round Table is the one I remember the most, you know, big American sort of thing. So he'd have all these books. He had Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar. And remember those, you'd get cassette tapes in the big plastic things that you could open up into, and there'd be like 6 on one side, 6 on the other. He'd get all that kind of stuff. And he never looked at it. And so because I was a really good student and I just enjoyed learning, I'd listen to his tapes. I loved hi-fi as well. So as a kid, I had, for about age 12, I went and bought my own hi-fi and so I'd listen to this stuff in my room. I'd read the books and I didn't really have anywhere for that knowledge to go. I'll talk a little bit about early work stuff later, but then the thing I wanted to do was to be the doctor that was the one that always was looking after me, which was respiratory medicine in the children's hospital setting. And because I was in there so often, I was often in there for the exams for the pediatric registrars. And so I was often the patient that they were examining and be a bit of a bugger as you might with that kind of stuff. Like you could put a wheeze on or you could turn it off depending on what you did. So sometimes I'd kind of intentionally try and roast them and be difficult. But it just, again, I was in the exams and I'd metaphorically sat exams well before. And so that was always the role I wanted to do. When I actually went and ended up getting into medicine and then I did a year of physician training, I actually thought, you know what, hospitals kind of suck. You've got to kiss a long line of buttholes. And I'm not really good at that. I have a great propensity to tell people what I'm thinking or be direct. And it's not really well appreciated when there's a hierarchical structure. And I remember in my hospital training, I once had 2 heads of unit tell me that they see to it that I never, ever got a role in in their area of expertise. One was in psych and one was in vascular surgery. And I was happy to tell both of them I had no plans to go into those fields in any case, so they could jam their threats. But, that didn't bode well for a career in the hospital system. Then in after I did that year of physician training, I took a year off in the UK. I was working in the Midlands. I was working in Warwick for a year, but I took a year out of the training system in Australia. Greatly enjoyed that, did a lot of travel, I had a lot of fun. And then when I came back, I decided I was going to do general practice. And that actually merged my two loves, which is medicine. I've always loved medicine. And I think that general practice is probably the only area of medicine where you can really build a business as well, rather than have a highly paid personal exertion job. And so I decided I'd go to general practice because when I reflected on it, all of the patients that I really loved were out of the hospital system. It's where you make the biggest impact with them. And just that longitudinal sort of knowledge and experience you have with people was a big part of that. So it was really where my love for medicine came from. And then it became general practice rather than hospital-based medicine. And then the experience from, reading all those books from my dad really gave me the mindset around work. And so since I was about age 12, I would do things like, I just picked the jobs that people hated doing. I love, so my passion is medicine, but my hobbies are cars. And, I really love hi-fi, and particularly in that era, I love that. I had remote control cars in that era because I couldn't yet get a big one. But the way I funded all those things I loved was through doing things people didn't like. So washing cars, I loved. And if people had a good car, I never used to offer to wash cars for shitty cars. So I wasn't interested in washing your 10-year-old Camry. But if I knew you had a Porsche or, a really nice Audi or whatever, I would wash the cars in the street as far as I could walk with my, buckets. And then windows. The guys liked their cars washed and the women liked the windows washed in the cars in that era, in the house rather. And so that was my holiday work, was window washing, and just weekend stuff I would do cars. And then later when I could work, I worked in a hi-fi store. That was my main employment, doing sales in hi-fi, which I really loved. And so that was paired with being at Melbourne Uni studying medicine. The place that sold the hi-fis was just in the city, so I worked Friday nights and Saturday, and often outsold the guys who worked there Monday to Friday. That was my ambition, was always to outsell them and make them regret working Monday to Friday.
So we're already getting a theme of someone a bit cheeky and cantankerous. If I'd been that medical student or doctor in the hospital, you would have had rubber gloves involved for sure. And then obviously a bit of a competitive streak in the hi-fi work. You wanted to outperform people in a much shorter time frame. And so you've settled on general practice. It brings you to loves of business and medicine and getting to know people over time together. So when did ownership happen for you?
So I graduated when I came back from the UK. I decided I would join the FRAC GP training. I graduated in 98, and I think that was December, so I sort of got the colours in 99. And then my first clinic I opened in 2003 after looking for probably 6 months or so. And what I was looking for was really interesting. I had two business partners that I was working with, one that was an accountant and one that was another GP. We found a site, or I found, actually, I did most of the work. I found a site in a growth suburb. Turned out to be a really good suburb for me and for business. When I first started there were 4,000 head of population in that suburb. When I kind of finished, in terms of sold my practice that was there were 25,000 people in that suburb. So it underwent, substantial growth. That's about the size of Mount Gambier from one that was kind of a dinky little suburb at the start. And so the initial place that I put up that I was negotiating on was at the back of a pharmacy. And when I say back, I mean literally you had to walk through the pharmacy to get to it. And so, it was a pretty crappy little place, but a good place to start. Super low overhead. So the rent, I think, was $26,000 a year for the 6 rooms, I think, that we had there, tilt slab-sided structure. So, when the sun set, the concrete got hot and the whole place was hot as hell. But what I love to start a place, one of my rules is you need to start with the lowest overhead you can, just so you've got the largest margin for failure. And if you make a misstep, it's not likely to kill you. And so that was the first one in 2003. And we pretty quickly filled that clinic up. Interesting story about the co-owner, the other GP. I'd done almost all the work on this place. The accountant had done a reasonable amount of work. And so we were 1/3 owners each. And I reckon I probably did about 60 to 65% of the work till that point in time. I reckon the accountant had done their 30%, and my other business partner, he'd probably done 5%. He'd done not much. And I kind of figured that his contribution would come once we opened. And anyway, I decided I'd go away. My wife and I went away, Rachel and I, for I think only a week's holiday to Port Douglas just prior to the opening. And my GP business partner gave me a call and said, "Oh, look, Todd, I've got problems with the accountant being a co-owner, and I want to talk to you about it." And he interrupted, even though he knew I was away. He kind of called me a few times while I was away with all of his concerns. Anyway, I came back. We went for a walking meeting, and on that meeting, he kind of put it to me. And this is probably 2, maybe 4 weeks before we opened. He put it to me that it was either him or the accountant. Somebody had to go. And I thought carefully about this, and I thought, well, the accountant's done pretty well everything they said they'll do, and they bring diversity in terms of skills. And the GP that was talking about me or the accountant hadn't really done much at all up until that point in time. And his suggestion was that if he went, that I would just call all the suppliers and halve everything that they were sending, even though we'd already signed agreements and committed to it. And I kind of told me everything I needed to know about this person. I said, "Well, I think it's you. See you later." And anyway, he did. And so that meant that I was basically running a business as the sole GP. And, I'm grateful for that experience, because without him, I may not have leaped into ownership. And he was a bit of a passenger, and so I was quite happy that he called the ball on exiting early. I remember my total capital contribution, Sachin, back then was about $6,000 to get the clinic started. That was my personal contribution, maybe as high as 10 grand. Like, it was really not much money, because we'd built this as a super lean startup. We'd borrowed some money, and obviously this guy was no longer part of the guarantees for that. But it wasn't a large amount of money that we borrowed. It was really for the IT more than anything. The rest of the stuff we'd kind of paid from our own pocket.
Nice.
And so yeah, this was a pretty low cost start. The guy that was a passenger opted out early on. That got me in. And I was fully committed then, right? Like, there was no second guessing it. And
All
then,
in.
I was going to say, the other thing was, it was useful for the partnership with the accountant, because he knew that I'd committed to him as well.
Absolutely. And so you're in this premises, 5-6 rooms, you said, an oven at the back of a pharmacy, but low cost, and you've only put 9 grand in, and then you've got one of your 2 business partners who's sort of saying, "It's me or the cat." Sorry to accountants listening. I don't mean to equate you with cats. So you took the accountant because they'd just been more accountable for what they said they were going to do. And also you sensed naivety in your conversations with your other partner at the time. So now you've signed, you've got minimum viable product, and I'm with you, like lowest cost to get moving, because the lowest risk for getting stuff done. And it's interesting, sometimes you speak to people who are like wanting to put down $1 million on a fit out and this, that, and the other. There's a time and a place for that. I don't think when you're starting is that time. All right, so there you are. You're all in. You've only put in between 6 and 10 grand. I love that too. Of your own money. I remember I did 9 when it was our time. So maybe you beat me, maybe you didn't. Okay, so now you're starting, you're opening. What happened next?
Yeah, actually, the story around my first patient I ever saw was really jarring for me, and a really important lesson in business and just the value of the work we do. So you can imagine the excitement with opening and serving your first patient and everything that goes into that. And so my state is here because I'm like, this is really cool. Done this thing. We've done a little bit of, promotion locally and did a pamphlet drop and all those kind of things that you do. And then the first guy that came in sat down in front of me, and I was like, "Hey, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Oh, what brings you in today?" He said, "I'm thinking of killing myself." And I was like, okay. And, this is not an unusual conversation for us to have in general practice, right? But this was first cab off the rank, patient number 1. And I just remember thinking, right, this is a reminder about what we're here to do. And I continued seeing this person until such time that I left that clinic. I was kind of proud of that. And also it was equally jarring that my state and his state, they could not have been further apart. And so it's a good reminder that it's a business, but at its core, it's a service that is a mandatory service for all Australians to be able to access good quality primary care. And it was just such a jarring juxtaposition between the two states that we're in. And then we really built quickly. I've got a reasonable network of people. I had experience in sales. And so recruiting is selling, really, in one regard. So I was on the recruitment side pretty well. We got that clinic to being full within probably 18 months with really good demographic tailwinds. There was no other practice in that area at that time. And then 18 months in, I got an opportunity to take another practice in the same area. And so this suburb had been built on the main highway and was kind of building back from the main highway. This new clinic was going to be the new town centre. And I wish I had the Google map for when I said yes to this, because it's literally foundations in a field of just dirt. There's nothing there. There's not even a road there. And so, and this was a very different kettle of fish, because it's a new build and it was purpose built. I remember it's $236,000 a year. So almost 10 times the rent of the first place. I think we had 12, maybe 14 rooms in new location. There was a co-located small radiology practice, about 90 square metres. There was a small physio that was, I think, 4 rooms, 3 or 4 rooms, and another small dental practice that was 3 or 4 rooms as well. And so we're all in this one facility. But yeah, it was about $230K for our commitment. And we had to commit that really shortly after the first clinic sort of got going. And I had to make a decision. Did we want to grow an empire, or did we want to stay small and potentially become less relevant in time? And I'm a bit of a, when you go after Moby Dick, take the tartare sauce kind of guy. And so I thought, look, you know what? And I obviously had to talk to my business partner about that. And we decided we would be ambitious and take on this new location. And so within 18 months to 2 years of starting, we had this second location to begin. And so that presented challenges for us. And the first challenge was naming. The first place was the usual name of the location. Mm-hmm. And then the second place, I decided, well, you can't have 2 places named in the same location. And so that's when we built the brand, and the brand that we settled on was Modern Medical. And I really loved that brand because it didn't permit me to set up a practice in an old building, an old home, some kind of shitty secondary location. It committed us to purpose-built practices. And it said everything about technology and leadership and all the things that I kind of wanted the brand to be. And so we committed to changing the brand to Modern Medical. And then we just had locations. It's like CBA or Westpac or whatever. They don't have to think about the name of the location. It's just here and here. And so that's, from then on, that piece of the puzzle was solved. I didn't have to worry about future naming conventions. And then we just had all the things that go with having 2 clinics kind of 3 to 4 kilometres apart, with technology and linking and databases and all that kind of stuff. And so the second one was in 2005. And then from there, I set up 12 new locations. They were all greenfield locations. So every single one of them we had to design. So I did the floor plans for all of these. I have a draftsperson that kind of had all my rules of thumb so we could get to them. I remember the first time I ever built a clinic with him, it took us about 27 revisions to get to the final revision. Then we could do it within 6 to 8 revisions in most cases after that. And so you get to be really good at, evaluating a floor space, putting a floor plan in, and then working in that, living in that floor plan, and kind of understanding what makes a place really work, which is very different to architects or anybody who's advising but not actually working in it. You don't ever get to work in it. You can go and look at it, but until you actually live in that environment and use it, you don't truly understand it. And so in Caroline Springs, in that first suburb, we had 5 locations in that suburb prior to collapsing them all into one location. So right. We had 2 big clinics, 1 admin location, 1 smaller location, and an after hours and specialist clinic, all in that one suburb. And I went back and looked at the numbers on this, and we had rents that were around about $900,000. And then in 2015, we collapsed them all into one location, which was 1,000 square meters, 28 rooms, had 25 GPs in there, thereabouts, maybe 28 at the peak. And the design of this was really critical. It was a large location, had amenity for after hours and specialty and a skin clinic in there as well. And that was 2015, and we paid, the rent was $325K for 1,000 square meters. But I also negotiated the fit out to be included in that. So it was an epic 900 plus to 320K change. And that brought about, the conditions, which are the next part where we got to sell some of those clinics. But that was an amazing. It was an amazing experience setting up all those different locations. But also it was an amazing service. So that one where we put it all into one location. I actually wished I lived in that suburb a lot, because it was an epic service. We're open from 8 a.m. till midnight. We had great in-hours services, out-of-hours services. The allied health services and non-GP specialist services out of there were really cool. We really did a lot to support the well-being of that local community. It was a really fun time.
Cool. And so I'm already picking, I think we're going to do an episode on that killer deal, because that's probably its own whole episode, like how that eventuated. But you just mentioned you did the first greenfield. The second one in the same suburb was 18 months or so later.
Mhm.
And then you subsequently did 12 more greenfields.
Yep.
So just to be clear, that means from nothing
To something.
to an operating general practice. And
Yeah.
and each of those, you designed the floor plan with your draftsperson, 27 revisions, and then you got it down to 6 to 8 for the remainder. That would have been an interesting time. Like, how did you go about it? So you were the main clinical person because your business partner was an accountant. So how did you do it? Like, you had an established practice you were working in, and then you're opening the greenfield. Like, how did you go about that?
Yeah, it was really opportunities were presented to me. Most people get to know that you're looking and expanding, and in most cases they were pharmacists that were wanting to either co-locate or closely locate. And so most of those opportunities were presented, and then I had some rules of thumb that I would work through to evaluate the community, what was the demand in the community, how viable was the space that we were being offered, what were we likely to be able to create in terms of the floor plan, the flows of the floor plan, like what trade-offs would be involved in those floor plans, what was the likelihood of recruiting GPs. I've spoken about this before, but my kind of back of the envelope calculations that I've spoken to, interviewed something like 500 GPs and recruited around 250. And so, there's a lot of experience in there. And I always had the view, my philosophy with recruiting GPs and with negotiating all of these real estate deals was that I would do it myself. My fundamental belief is that you get better through repetition. And so I love reading and learning. And so spaced repetition was my thing. I wanted to learn how to be better at all of those things. And, you can read about something, but you've got to be on the field. You've got to be on the field of battle to really have those lessons solidified and then to be able to take that learning to the next one. So I was pretty meticulous with detailing everything. So, I found some of my old notes and those old clip folders, and I'd get in there. And I remember, my first cuts of floor plans, I'd literally do an building envelope, and then I'll just cut out the standard sizes for rooms in paper and just move them around and shuffle them around and try and fit all the things in that I needed to. And so I got to be pretty proficient at evaluating a space very quickly as to how viable it was likely to be or not. And then I am good at negotiating the outcome that is most suitable for me or for the owners. And the reason for that was just that if they weren't able to budge or they couldn't come across to my way of thinking, it'll just be no deal. So I was always happy with no deal. I think you have to be equipoised over, if I can get it on these terms, it's a go. If I can't, then I'll let it go through to the keeper. And one of those deals that I let go through to the keeper was around viability for us. So we had taken on, and I'll talk a bit more about this, we'd taken on more than we could, than we should. And so it was a lot to chew. And one of those deals, it was a good deal that I had to say no to because I was worried about our resources, ended up being one that connected us. And so I'm grateful for the journey that put me in a position to say, this looks great, but it's a no for me for now. And that ended up being, and we'll touch on that in the episode we get to talk about you, but that was one where we were bitten off more than we can chew. And so we did have some troubles with growth, and I'm happy to share anything that's relevant around that. That was through that sort of era between pre-2008 and 2012. There was a lot of pressure put on business through the financial crisis as well. The global financial crisis meant that banks were kind of, not willing to give money to businesses or people that had any risk associated with them. And they probably did some unethical things through that time because they could. I think we shouldn't forget that they're not your friend. They're really, they join you provided they know that there's zero risk to any of their funding. And so through that time, we'd pushed harder than we should. The risk with greenfields is you've got to start everything from scratch, right? You got to recruit everyone. You've got to recruit patients, staff, GPs. I probably underestimated how much effort was involved in that. Not just effort involved in getting it started, but then maintaining it, because we didn't really have enough grunt in the administrative side of the business. And so, one of my future learnings is I would have been a bit more thorough about building out the accountability chart, making sure people had clear scorecards. I was sort of Johnny everywhere. I was, doing what was required. And being the only GP as an owner meant that when things went to custard, it was me that had to go and fix it. And that got pretty tiring pretty quickly. And it was demanding on not just myself, but on my family as well. That at the time I had really young kids and they had needs. That the truth is, I missed out on some of those things that I should have been doing because of the kind of primacy of the commitments that I'd made to the business. And this was truth. It was a joke, but, a lot of jokes have a kernel of truth in them. The best kind of toilets and bathroom amenities were in the clinics. Meanwhile, the money that I could have been spending on fixing my home up and improving that was invested in those clinics at that time and tied up in that environment. So things like that, there are trade-offs you have to make, in business. I'm not sure that if I had my time again, I would necessarily do things in the same way. But nevertheless, as my mum says, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. You you got to play the cards you dealt, and even though those were the cards I chose, I actively looked for mentorship, coaching, knowledge in the era that I was banning and setting these clinics up. It didn't really exist. At least I didn't find it. I know you had a little bit more luck later on. And so my knowledge base was actually books, and so my mentors were actually virtualized mentors. So I had books that I loved reading, and I had people that I really enjoyed their knowledge, Michael Gerber, Stephen Covey, amongst the many. And I just would ask myself, what would this person do in this circumstance, And that was pretty well how I guided myself through that. But that's a pretty blunt instrument, and including things like listening to cassette tapes and so on, or CDs, DVDs. It was good, but not as good as what you can get now. And I do think, one of my motivations and our motivations for setting Scar My Clinic up was to build the thing you wish you had. I wish I had that when I was going through the stage of growing practices and building that empire, because it would have me shortcut a lot of pain that probably wasn't necessary. I think it's something you and I talk about. You can't grow into pain. And so when things are overwhelming you or causing stress, and there's a lot of fires, one of my tendencies and one of my areas that I'm working on is that I would tend to try and put out all the fires at once. Which means you put out none of the fires, of course. A good friend of ours, Tony, says you've got to let the fires burn and just put one of them out. And so I am getting better at that, but it does take time to master that trait.
That's a really great insight. I just want to go back to that intense growth period. You're opening up new site after new site. I remember when I had some of those opportunities in my own ownership journey, I would be worried, like fearful, like if I do that, then this is going to be in jeopardy. Things are going to go wrong. I think they're normal thoughts, but they stopped me acting at times. How did you overcome that? Did you have those fears, or were you just about the tartare sauce with Moby Dick? How did you do it?
I think one of the character traits of entrepreneurs is over-exuberance, hubris, over-optimism. And so I am overly optimistic in almost every sphere of life. And so that does translate into business. The problem, of course, is that you need somebody who says, so if it was the Ice Age, I'd be running out in my shorts with a towel saying, you know what, the weather's going to change. And having that person behind you going, you know what, maybe we should take some mittens and wet weather clothes just in case, till we ensure the survival of the human race. And so, having an accountant as a business partner was good with that, because they had a little bit more of a rigorous approach around finance side. And so, that was a really good counterbalance. And I think you got to recognize that in partnerships, you don't want somebody like you. That's not particularly helpful. You want somebody who's got strengths that are opposite yours and can counterbalance. So I think we did really well in that perspective. I was much more like the relationship guy in the bank, and he was more like credit. And so the final decisions would still go through the accountant, and he would have final say on things despite being a minority shareholder, where our rule was we had to agree on everything. And so, but I did some stuff that when I look back on it now, it was pretty wacky. So one of the businesses is in a shopping centre, and this shopping centre was was launched in about 2008. So, really shocking time to launch a shopping centre. It was launched by a really famous Melbourne icon owned by this guy, big guy, and really experienced guy. His chain of supermarkets are well known. Anyway, he's not around now, so I can probably tell this story. But I went really hard on this place in getting, and our tenancy was required to help them get the pharmacy in the shopping centre. And so we took two shops and we had to do some structural things to help them remain as two tenancies. And I put in a rant that it is 2008, so it's not that long ago, but The rent was stupid. And I think we paid $12,000 per tenancy for the rent. This is in a brand new shopping centre, a cold shell. Actually, it ended up a warm shell that I negotiated. And so we still had to build a fit out in there, but we got this place for probably a quarter of its actual price. And this guy said to me, he said, right, if you want it, you got to take the checks and you got to drop them off at my office. And it's got to be by tomorrow midday. We were negotiating on it. We'd gone backwards and forwards a bit, and he'd had enough of me. Anyway, I got them there, and I had this feeling this guy would renege on the deal. So I said to the person in the office manager, I said, look, do you mind taking a photocopy of the checks and signing it for me and put a date and time on it? So she's like, yeah, cool. And they banked them. Anyway, I was at the shopping centre, and this guy was there doing the rounds, and I'm about 5'6", and this guy's about 6'2", big guy. And this is for Australians mostly, so I can talk about football analogies. But, David Park and Ron Barassi are famous coaches in the AFL that would give, like if you saw slow motion of them at halftime, they would be giving the players an old-fashioned spit going everywhere, red faces, like absolutely going crazy. This guy, well, I said, how are you going to his name? And he came up to me and he stood right in front of me and he gave me a full-on old-fashioned spray. You bloody blah, blah. He's just tore shreds off me for a while. And stood there, and after he kind of ran out of stuff to say, I said, are you finished? And I kind of said a few more things. I said, all right, cool. So our agreement was this. I said I would do this. I've gone and done the bit that I said. And so as far as I understand it, we have an agreement. And he said, oh, you didn't do it. He said, I said, well, here's the piece of paper and here's the two checks that I dropped off at the time that you said. Here's the email, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, right, you can get F. But anyway, we did have a deal that stood. So I have had some interesting times in negotiating those places. But we had this place at a great rent, a great opportunity, and then we got in there and fitted that out. You do have a little bit more entertainment when it's greenfields in terms of the type of characters that you get to work with.
Absolutely. Sounds like a real character. And it was pre-COVID. Maybe we thought differently about getting spat on. So you've shared it probably wasn't that lighthearted at the time, but even if internally you were giggling, but probably unpleasant on being on the receiving end of that. Through that time of ownership, there's probably some highs and some lows that you had. And for people listening or watching this podcast, they might be owners who are also experiencing highs or lows. And sometimes, especially in the low time, it can feel like, you know what, it's just me. I'm the only one going through this. Like maybe I'm a failure. Maybe I just need to run away. I know you and I will have both have had some of those thoughts. We've talked about it before. I'd love to hear what was the toughest time in ownership for you, and as well as hearing about it, like what got you through.
Hey, general practice owners and practice managers. Running a clinic today can feel overwhelming. Patients leaving for quick fixes, recruitment struggles, rising costs, and endless compliance demands. But it doesn't have to be this way. Join us at SGPO 2025. The Disruption Proof Practice. It's a free online conference happening on the 27th and 28th of February. Here's why you can't miss this event. Earn 12 RACGP CPD hours whilst learning practical strategies tailored to general practice. Hear from 12 expert speakers across 2 days, sharing real-world solutions to boost your clinic's performance. You'll be able to walk away with actionable insights on patient retention, team leadership, profitability, and navigating industry changes. Best of all, it's completely free to register. And for those ready to go the extra mile, you can upgrade to our Platinum Pass for just $297 and unlock lifetime access to session recordings, a copy of the Successful General Practice book, and personalized tools to transform your clinic. So you can register now via the link in the show notes in this podcast, or go to our website, www.scalemyclinic.com, and at the top of that, there will be a Register Now button. So that's www.scalemyclinic.com and the Register Now button at the top. Let's make 2025 the year your clinic thrives.
Yeah, so probably two things relating to the same problem. And so that second clinic we bought was the biggest clinic up until we collapsed them all into, one really large one later on. And the clinic was running well. It was profitable, making a good profit. And I personally was doing well as a GP. So the way I treated it always was that the income that I generated from my expertise as a GP was what I would live my life on. And the business income was initially to replace my wife's earnings. And then later on, it was investment. The idea was that we would use that for other things to create a life and something for our family. So what happened was, though, one of the clinics we started up, we had cultural problems in the clinic and doctors resigned. So we went from 4 GPs to 3 to 2 to 1. And then I got an email, I'm giving my notice. And I thought, fuck, now we've got a business that we've committed to, and it's, to be blunt, it's fallen apart. And so I had this a really frustrating circumstance. Remembering I've got an owner that owns 35%, is not able to do any work in the business. And I'm optimizing for my own personal income, and I've optimized for the kind of leadership input. Although you could argue that, I hadn't done that well because this clinic was about to shut down. And so I had a choice. And the choice was, do I go and fix the clinic, which is what I believed was my only choice? Or do I close it and then frustrate the community and let down the other people who are part of that, employees, etc.? And what I chose to do was to go and revive the clinic, So I was, this is like, the clinic is like Resusci Annie. Staying Alive is in the background, and I'm there doing chest compressions on this practice. And this is a source of annoyance for me still, because I personally sacrificed a lot. And at this point in time, I had 2 business partners, one that's an accountant and one that's an investment banker that came on later. And the frustration for me was that the problems were felt personally by me. So I had to drive. The clinic that was going really well was only a 20-minute drive for me. This location that had died was about an hour and a half drive, and they were undertaking substantial roadworks during that time as well. So it was 3 hours a day driving. I earned around about half of what I did in the main clinic in personal exertion income. And the business didn't really create a mechanism to correct for that. So, there was a source of some resentment for me. I thought I'd probably be there for 6 months, maybe 9 months, but it turned out it was more like 18 months to 2 years. And, what I'm proud of is that clinic restarted and was part of our sales. And later on, we sold it for about, from memory, we sold it for about 1.4 mil. And so pretty good return considering something died. However, that 1.4 mil went proportionally to the 3 owners. And I think I could make a valid argument that I should have been disproportionately rewarded for that. That was probably one of the hardest times in my life, in that there was family sacrifice involved. There was personal sacrifice, and that, my earnings went backwards. I started with a whole new group of patients. I had to train up staff, rebuild a clinic culturally, systems, processes, everything that goes with it. And one day on the way to work, I think it was on the way to work, I got a call from the bank. The bank said to me, hey, is this Todd? I said, yep. And they said, look, we've reviewed your banking and we've decided that we would like you to move your banking somewhere else. So I said, you sort of go, okay. When would you like me to do this? And they said, tomorrow would be good. Now, that was a pretty frustrating call. Right. And so this is all around the GFC. And look, the reality is that was actually a good call at the time. I can see why they might have thought that we were too high a risk. And I foolishly had mixed my personal banking and business banking together.
Right.
And so all of the lines were tied up together. And I was the one that, my earnings had dropped because I'd moved locations. And one of the things that I think is typical of entrepreneurs is they're over accountable. And so I took on full accountability for reviving and starting that clinic. I didn't really ever have a discussion with my business partners about how unreasonable that was. And when I reflect on it afterwards, I think it was unreasonable. And really, there was no shared risk, that it was 100% my risk. And then guess what happened when it came time to sell it? They were able to take their portion of profits, no problem, and didn't really have any qualms about that. And so I think I probably would have behaved differently as a non-exertional owner, somebody who's, nose in, hands out, because it was very hands-on. That was one really tough experience around. It wasn't failure because in the end it came good, but it was certainly a failure in terms of it wasn't the plan that we'd planned to execute on. I was really proud of the fact that clinic did come back to be a great service provider, really good culture, and it did well. And then it was able to be sold as part of our sale to a exit to a corporate. So all of that was really good, but it was a really tough experience because 2 years of doing 3 hours a day driving and reducing your income personally. And the other thing, Sachin, you'll know this from somebody who started a clinic, is what I would do is kind of get myself to 120% of my capacity, then hire a GP, back off to about 80% of what I'd like to be doing. So essentially, I would either be overcommitting to work intentionally or have less work than I needed personally for income because I was getting someone else on board. Now, I reckon that's cool if you're 100% owner and that's a decision you've made. I didn't particularly love that when I had two owners that didn't contribute to the earnings of the clinic. They add value in other ways, but that particular time that did irk me quite substantially. And that was a pretty shitty time. The way I got through it, so this is probably from my illness and just my personality, but there were times with asthma that I ended up in intensive care a few times. And I remember a few of those times I was like, look, I'm not sure he's going to make it. And the way I always got through a tough time was just to focus on the next step. And so I kind of think that in times of duress, rather than looking towards the horizon, you sort of look down to where your feet are and just check that your next step has solid footing and you can make progress. Because I fundamentally believe if you put enough of those together, you'll kind of get to the destination. But it's often not helpful to look at the destination when you're like, fuck, maybe I'll never make it there. It's just too far away and it's too overwhelming. And so during periods of overwhelm, I would just remind myself that there's nobility in discharging your duties in a small way, showing up and showing up in the way that you need to show up. You're not going to show up at a clinic and bitch and moan about the fact that this is tough on you. That's not going to inspire anyone. And so you got to find an outlet for those things. So I found the gym and fitness to be useful outlets for that. And those are things that I dropped for a period and then have picked up again. But I found that there are other ways of having an outlet for that. Talking about it with people you care about, it's really important as well. But you do need to show up in the right frame of mind, the right state of mind. And you need to show up as a leader. And so I'm proud that, I don't think anybody that I've ever worked with would have seen me lose my cool or would have seen me scream or yell at anyone or degrade anyone. That's not my style. And so my philosophy was always, you need to show up. Probably the trade-off for that is the places I didn't show up as well in, because there is a trade-off, is that, that would have been at home. Like I would have been more tired than I should be in those times because of the emotional and physical, intellectual nature of, what I was doing. And so you're not as available for partners and for kids as I should say I wasn't as available, rather than generalizing it. I found that I didn't do those things as well as I could. And so potentially compensate for those things later on and try to make up for lost ground. It's not for me to say whether I did or didn't do that, but they're probably the areas that I, wish I had more coaching on. I'll give you an example of this where I fundamentally believe that people wouldn't do something that I wasn't doing. This is that kind of one of the most stupid things people say to you is don't ever give people a job that you wouldn't do yourself. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, you're going to give a mechanic a job that you can't do, and you're going to give a house builder a job that you can't do. And so I kind of believe that it's a little bit like that foundational belief in law firms and accounting firms. You got to be first in and last out. And, I had too much of that in my belief structure. And my dad died when I was relatively young. I was 14. And so I didn't necessarily have, not that I necessarily believe he would have given me good insights, but I didn't have connection to a group of people that might correct some of those things. But I believe that. And so what I did was for a decade, I worked every second Saturday, 9 to 5. Because I believed nobody else would do it. And I did it every second Saturday, come hell or high water. Really, that was my primary commitment on every second Saturday, not the things that should have been my primary commitment. Should have been other things that just took primacy over that. And I committed to it because I believed that was the case. I subsequently proved to myself and others that's completely untrue. But I believed that for a long time. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think Scale My Clinic and coaching owners is so important from the perspective of being an owner, because you know what it's like. You know about these false beliefs that get inserted. You don't even necessarily know where they come from. You just kind of believe these things to be true. And it's not. They're bullshit, unhelpful ideas. The problem is they're part true, right? You got to be prepared to do whatever it takes, just like I talked about with that clinic that the last doctor walked out the door. You got to be prepared to do whatever it takes. It doesn't mean you always have to, but, when the call comes, you got to be able to down tools and go and do what's required.
Absolutely. I think for any of us in business and in life, false beliefs is what limits you, otherwise known as limiting beliefs. And the first step is knowing that they exist in general. And then you need to be able to shine a light, or have someone shine a light or question or teach you to question and help you reframe that. But that is actually one of the hardest things to learn and do until you deliberately start to do it, and be around people who, by what they're doing or achieving or thinking, help you question yourself in a helpful way, if that makes sense. Because you suddenly, something you believe is broken because you've seen someone else achieve the thing that you assumed is not possible. That's really useful in many ways. I think typical example is the 1 minute mile. The 4-minute mile, sorry, not the 1-minute mile.
Yeah.
But now that robots are here, that could happen. You don't know. But the 4-minute mile, I think Roger Bannister was trying to do it, and people were trying to do it for decades. And the year after Roger Bannister did it, something like somewhere between 6 to 15 people. Then
and Peter Landy did it very shortly afterwards.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Brit and then Oz.
There you go.
Cool. That's really insightful. Thanks for being so open about it. We've talked about the worst moments. What was your best moment in your ownership journey, or has been so far?
I think the best thing about owning a business is, so it's actually, for me, it's kind of thousands of little moments, and then I'll talk about probably one that stands out. But I love the fact, like, I really like walking in there. So I always treated the business like beginning a game of tennis or something. I'm not a tennis player, but you're thanking the ball boys and the ball girls. And so I would do the round, hey, good morning, how's, checking on everyone. And then at the end of the day, I'd be, hey, thanks for your support today. Go around and do the rounds at the end. Like, metaphorically, like someone on a factory floor, right? And so I really enjoyed just knowing that we were all there to solve the same problem. Like that gives me a real kick, knowing that. And then you walk out one time, when you're consulting and the waiting room's jammed, it's people hanging from the rafters. And I would just think it's really fucking cool. Like, the fact that we can help all these people, that we can do this, is really a kick. And so I actually got lots of moments like that I enjoyed. And then probably the one that was the coolest, like when we collapsed all of those locations, there's a bit of a funny story on one of them. One of them was owned by a pharmacist. A lot of these locations were owned by pharmacists. This guy's a bit of a grumpy guy. Anyway, so 2015, this was 10 years at the second location in this suburb. So there were 5-year terms. We had like 5 by 5 by 5. There's 5 lots of 5. And so we're coming to the end of the 10-year term. And I said to the guy, look, the way the rent's going, I had a meeting with him. I said, look, the way the rent's going, it's at a level that is not going to make the business viable for us. If you can't change the rent, then we're not likely to be here. And this was still down in the town centre. And he said to me, you know what, you can get fucked. You guys bloody always whinging about stuff, you GPs and blah, blah, blah. And he had a real go at me personally as well as for making the request. And I said, that's cool. I said, look, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't have this conversation. So I'm grateful that we had it. If you change your mind or anything happens, then let me know. Anyway, he didn't come back to me. And so I'd made a commitment that we would close this clinic. And by this time, just to give you an idea of how big the clinic was, it was 16 rooms. So this sounds really petty. My highlight is also built on a foundation of pettiness, but this is fantastic. Let me share the story. So this guy's told me to F off and that there's no way he was going to renegotiate the rent. So I said, cool. And so then we just breezed through the notice periods and everything. They were like, you need to let us know if you want to renew and everything. I just ignored all the emails, didn't worry about it. And then what we did was we shut this clinic at midday. This clinic had been open for 10 years, 16 rooms. Shut it at midday, removed everything. As in by Monday morning, 8 a.m., there was nothing left in that building. There was no signage left on that building. It was completely empty. And the new one set up. So we started at the new location, which was 4 kilometres away, different pharmacy opposite it. And this pharmacist rings me because his pharmacy was not far away. He goes, what are you doing? What are you hell doing, Tom? You're trying to ruin my business. This is bullshit, blah, blah, blah. I said, I seem to remember a call where you told me to F off. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I did. What's the problem? This guy was complaining about the impact on his business of moving 16 GPs away from him. It was absolutely fantastic. Anyway, starting the new clinic on that foundation of pettiness was great because this new clinic, we had time to design it. So what we did was we had a floor plan. It was a little bit of an unusual sort of layout. It wasn't a nice even envelope, a rectangle or square, as they often aren't. But what I did was I did the first cut of the floor plan, and then everybody who worked in the building, under cone of silence, we had a meeting where everybody was given plans. And I mean, GPs, every single employee, any allied health that worked with us in the other 5 clinics, they were all invited to a meeting to give feedback on how we could change the design. And I didn't give them a blank page because I believe that when you give people a blank page, they have no idea. So I gave them the first cut, and then people tore it apart. And so I just facilitated a big meeting. We did this over 2 or 3 times, and then we kind of got down to a core of people who were really interested in contributing. And so the new design was extremely collaborative. And so it was a brilliant, brilliant design in that it really got the most out of the building envelope. We had a breastfeeding room in there. We had patient amenities. We had sub-waiting rooms for allied health, for the main room pathology. The treatment room had 4 beds. It had a special office for the nurses. It had an area where they could do immunisations. It was a brilliant design, and it was really because we were able to get the collaborative input of all of these other people. And so when that opened, I was super proud of the building and the engineering that went into the building and the thinking that went into it, the collaboration, and it absolutely looked magnificent. It was a really lovely place to work, and just the buy-in from all those people from that, that they were able to feel that they had co-designed this space. And, we got some really wacky people as well that were like, I reckon you should just completely do it. And you're like, no, we're not doing that. but overall, it was a really good experience. And then it was originally designed as a kind of a bulky goods area. And so there was a loading dock in there, or there is a loading dock in this building as well, that couldn't be kind of reincorporated into the space. And so what we did in the loading dock is we put a table tennis table in there, and we would have competitions between all of the staff just at various times. We'd go and play a game of table tennis out the back. And it was a lot of fun, like a really good place to work, amazing facility. And it completely turned around the viability of that clinic in that all of those resources went into one. As I said, we reduced our rent by something like 650 grand per year. And so, that single clinic was incredibly profitable. In 2015, it was doing 1.2, 1.3 mil of EBITDA. As I said, somewhere between 24 and 28 GPs in there, about 5 allied health rooms that were running pretty full time, and then after hours till midnight, specialist skin clinic. It was a really cool place to work. And so my proudest creation was that particular thing. And then I just got to be good at deal making, setting new ones up with very limited capital going into them, getting them up to speed quickly. And I think Mike Tyson said it best: everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And what I can tell you, Sachin, is despite my beautiful looks, I did get punched in the face a lot of times, but I kept getting up. You only have to get up one more time, then you get knocked down.
Yeah. And you continue to invite those punches, Todd.
I do. I'm just better at running now.
Yeah. Awesome. So that was, again, really insightful. And, I think it illustrates as well, like you could have become quite unresourceful when they said, actually, we're not going to change the rent. We're not going to do anything. But what I'm hearing is you took that, and maybe, your nature is also to turn that into fuel. You took it as fuel to, all right, well, we're going to drive a change. And then you managed to do it. And just to be clear, you shut at midday on a Friday. And then this was like the whole place was cleaned up, like in the mafia movies where there's dead bodies, and then you come back and there's no sign of anything. And all the evidence had gone that you'd ever existed there. And by Monday morning, you were open at the location 4 Ks away.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Exactly that.
I love that. That's hilarious. Cool. And so obviously I alluded earlier, you're still an owner, but along the way you've had exit from the original Modern Medical. I think it would be useful just to hear, what you're able to share about that.
So in 2016, we had approaches along the way as to, people wanting to buy the either individual clinics or the group. And, I was probably ready to do that. I thought there was probably asymmetrical work for me as an owner amongst the three of us, and it was something that was appealing. And then we got an unusual offer from the chairperson of this new organisation and the financial originator of this new organisation. They came and they said, well, we'd like to buy your 2 largest businesses, which at the time was Baldwin and Carolyn Spring, and put them into a new publicly listed entity. And as part of that, we'd like you to be a director. They wanted me to be a director of this ASX listed company. And so this business was a defunct ASX listing. Businesses die on the ASX. And if you and I want to set up a business on the ASX, there's a cost associated with that. So there's a group of people that will clean up the entity, and it has value because it costs you money to go and set a new one up. And so this was a reverse listing in a mining business called BGD. And so the sale came with some cash, and a substantial chunk of the sale was in shares in this new entity, which came with substantial risk because, there's big execution risk on this. And so in 2016, we vended the 2 largest clinics into that. And that was the only business in that entity at that time. And then there was myself and the CEO and two other directors, chairperson and this originator. And then over time, we rebranded that business as Zenitas. In the next 2 years, Zenitas grew to $175 million in revenues, and that was composed of general practices. There were 12 general practices, modern medical, and then some others in there. And there were, I think, around about 65 allied health businesses, primarily physiotherapists. There was mobile services into aged care, and there were home care services, which was NDIS funding. And so there were kind of 4 key verticals there. And then in 2018, that was there was a bid put in by the same 2 people who started, the chairperson and the financial originator. They put in a bid to take it private. And so that was a really interesting time for me as a director, because the CEO was the other person. There was an international person on the board as well that didn't attend a lot of the board meetings, but represented one of the largest shareholders. And so effectively, I was the only independent director during that period of time when the takeover was in place. And I kind of knew that in the event that something was to be declared, a conflict of interest, or directors weren't behaving in the interest of the shareholders, that I would probably be the bunny. And so my rule was that I had to get smart really quickly and learn as much as I could about takeovers. And during the time that I was there, we did a lot of due diligence because we grew so quickly. And so I would be involved in the due diligence for those purchases, visiting practices, talking to owners about, what their business might be worth, negotiating purchases, having involvement outside of just my director role. And during that period of time, my learning went from here to here, and I'm really grateful for the opportunities that afforded me to work with tier 1, tier 2 legal firms, accounting firms, and advisory firms, just understanding the way that the world worked. And then that actually did go through, so that business was taken private. And then as part of that, all of my shares obviously were acquired as part of the privatisation. And so my obligations to not just the ASX listed entity, but more broadly to, just to restrictions that come with that, about advising other general practice owners. So I used to do a lot of pro bono work in that time for practice owners. And I'd post a lot about practice ownership on say, LinkedIn and Facebook, because it's something I'm really passionate about. And that was really what led to you and I catching up as well, because, I'd go to everything. The most ridiculous thing I ever went to was a meeting that was intended for CFOs, and it was run by the Age and the Financial Review. I just went because I was there to learn. I love learning. I love learning about business. I think business is the best personal development vehicle there is. And so you and I met each other at a conference that was for practice owners, not general practice owners, but for practice owners. And in that connection, we realised that we had a substantial overlapping interest, and you'd been mostly working through GPs, and I'd been mostly helping owners. And we decided, there's something here. We need to work together, and we need to set up something for owners, because we recognise that the biggest lever in general practice is owners. And both of us, we fundamentally believe that general practice is the most important service in the health system, and that if it doesn't exist, that all Australians suffer. We have a really good general practice system in this country, but it's continually neglected. I got a haircut the other day, as you're probably noticing, and I said to the hairdresser, I think general practice and hairdressing have a lot in common in that they're required by everybody, some people excluded, and they're required by most of us, and they're used regularly, not usually given a great deal of respect. They're kind of treated as something that's always there and not really necessarily appreciated, although people appreciate theirs. They often appreciate the person that they, much like general practice. But general practice is mistreated by the federal government year in and year out. It's underfunded, pushed around. Everybody's telling us what we should be doing. Nobody really has any idea about what the job is. Most people can't explain it. Most politicians don't get it. Most non-GP specialists don't really get what's involved in general practice. We're the first and last line of care for almost everything. And, I think people don't really understand what would happen if general practice treated the market like a lot of non-GP specialists said, I don't do that. I'm not doing that. The stuff that would fall through the cracks in the system, and the people that would be sacrificed on the back of that. And that frankly shoots me the way general practice is treated. And so I really strongly stand for a strong and vibrant, sustainable general practice. I fundamentally believe that private owners are the pathway to that. I don't give a shit about corporates or not-for-profits for other reasons. I just think not-for-profits, and I've been a chair of a Medicare local. I've worked in lots of not-for-profits. Just think they can't make a decision to save themselves. There's a committee for everything. There's no accountability, and mostly the profit is redistributed amongst overhyped salaries for all of the people in the organisation. And corporates aren't interested in your health in the community. It's a spreadsheet. That's what it is to them. It's a source of money, and I've seen that. I don't want to be part of corporates in the future. I don't want to support corporates. I want to support private general practice, and I want that to thrive. We've all got a big problem because that's not happening at the moment. It's less and less popular.
Absolutely. 6.5 years, actually, roughly, that we shook hands and Scale My Clinic was born. And it's been a pleasure since then. One last question for you, Todd. You have the opportunity to get in the time machine and go back and give some advice to a younger version of you. Maybe early on in your medical journey, maybe at the outset of ownership. You choose the time, but tell us when you'd go back to and what advice you'd give to that younger version of you.
Yeah, if I went back to when I first started in practice, probably two things I'd do differently. One is I'd have a better conversation with myself and with the people around me about my boundaries. What are my tolerances? I think one of the problems with being a GP and a business owner is, in both cases, you often get taught how to take punches rather than just going, I'm not going to stand where someone's punching me. And so I would be better at drawing boundaries around what's acceptable and not. I would probably have been less aggressive about expanding in greenfield locations. GFC fed into that a lot. We could debate whether that's predictable or not. I probably would have bought more existing practices. I always wanted to do things my way, and that's probably a weakness in that I lacked flexibility in that thinking of just taking on something that other people have begun. And I would just be better at the boundaries between what's my responsibility and what's the responsibility of others to fix. I think that over-accountability, super common amongst entrepreneurs, probably not helpful beyond a certain amount, and that kind of willingness to sacrifice myself is probably not useful. They're probably the main things that I would tell myself. I would have looked harder for help too. I thought I looked hard, but probably not hard enough. And so my advice to other owners is get help. The odds of you being able to do this yourself. So, we accept that it takes us 12 years to be a GP. We accept that. And we just expect that we can run a business without any training. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It takes a decade to build anything of substance. And, we chat to owners every day. It takes a decade to build a business that is an asset, that is an unbelievably good business. And we should all commit to getting education in that space. I think anything that's important, you should get coaching, you should get education, you should get training, and you should have some kind of accountability around doing that. And some people are really highly accountable to themselves. That's great. Most people need some kind of external accountability to be held to. And so those are the kind of ingredients for success. I don't mind hard work. And so I think that's actually a weakness sometimes, because what you're prepared to do is do it yourself when you really should be saying, okay, what am I sacrificing in doing this myself, and how quickly could somebody else do this, and what could I learn from them? I would do more of that. And I do more of that. You and I do more of that. We get experts in to teach or take accountability for something, maybe a project or an ongoing business as usual. It makes all the difference. So I think that's probably what I'd change.
Absolutely. I think, smart people are always going to get there in the end, but do you want to wait till the end is the key, or do you want to bring it sooner? And that's been my learning, I think, and my insight from coaching, whether it's in, receiving it in business or in other areas of life, is that you just get more likely to get the result faster and with less. There's still discomfort, there's still work involved, but you might as well be doing the right work in the right places, avoiding some of the pitfalls that others have already spotted. Todd, that has been super insightful, and thank you for really sharing very openly your journey. We're going to stop there. Take care. Thank you for listening or watching. We'll be back soon.
Thank you, Sachin.
Thanks for tuning in to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights and practical steps to take your clinic to the next level. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share it with other general practice owners who benefit from improving their practices too. Looking for more tools, resources and updates? Why not follow us on Facebook at Scale My Clinic to stay connected, to join the conversation with like-minded practice owners. Let's keep working together to scale your clinic and build something truly impactful. See you next time.